Emisión.net.
Hello again and welcome to Letter from England, broadcasting for AC Press and the Evangelical Alliance. The fallout from the official state funeral for the victims of the Madrid air disaster on August the 20th continues, with great controversy in the evangelical community about the participation of Carlos López, the Anglican Bishop of Madrid, in representation of the FEDERA, the Federation of Evangelical Organizations, which represents the vast majority of evangelicals in Spain. The King and Queen of Spain, the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, other government ministers, opposition politicians were among several hundred mourners at the state funeral for the 154 victims of the Madrid air disaster, which was the funeral was held at Almudena Cathedral in Madrid. The service was led by the Catholic Archbishop of Madrid, Antonio María Roco. However, for evangelicals, the most contentious elements were the Catholic ritual, which underlines the work of Christ on the cross, and the participation by the Anglican Bishop of Madrid, as we've said, on behalf of the one evangelical victim of the crash, Rubén Santana, who was a member of a Baptist church in Madrid. Well, Roco, as is customary at a Catholic Mass, celebrated the Eucharist, made intercession to Mary, prayed for the dead, quote, that God's mercy might reach them, and treated them all as, quote, Christians. And in the complete contradiction of the Christian gospel, the Archbishop said before the funeral, quote, our faith in Jesus Christ, dead and raised to life, helps us to pray for them, that is the dead, so that they may be admitted into his kingdom. So, as is habitual also at a Catholic funeral, Roco pleaded for the destiny of the victims' souls. He did encourage the victims' families not, quote again, to lose their strength, but to carry on in order to overcome their pain with serenity and face the difficult personal challenges that they will have to deal with. And of course, we concur with those latter sentiments. But then towards the end of the funeral came the participation of, quote, a Protestant bishop. That's how it was announced, on the grounds that one of the victims was evangelical, and Carlos López, Anglican Bishop of Madrid, spoke on behalf of, or in the name of, as he himself said, the Protestant, Evangelical and Anglican member churches of the Federation. Well, apart from the perhaps curious mixture of terms and how one might distinguish those, he went on to offer his solidarity with the victims' families and their suffering, and showed how Jesus comes close to us in our pain, as well as offering the hope of eternal life to those who put their faith in Jesus. And amen to that, of course. He thanked the organisers for inviting him to participate in the funeral, and offered up a medieval prayer that meditates on death and our response to it. And this is the first time that a Protestant has ever been invited to participate in such a high-profile Catholic funeral, and was a public recognition that the faith of one of the victims was evangelical. So what is all the fuss about? Whose funeral was it anyway? Well, before we answer that question, perhaps we should look at the criticism that there has been. Not all evangelical observers are enthusiastic about it. Pedro Tarquis, for example, spokesman for the Spanish Evangelical Alliance, says, it was tokenism within a Catholic funeral. It would be much better to have had a civil, multi-faith funeral. I'm not sure if he means civil or multi-faith, or a combination of the two, but in which all citizens and faiths were equal in the eyes of the state, he says. Rather than this concession within a Catholic funeral, giving us a little space within a service which belongs to a different religion from ours. However, he admits, it is an advance on previous Catholic events. Well, the Evangelical Alliance, of course, had put out a statement earlier, before the funeral, in fact on September the 11th, with regard to the official state funeral that was being prepared. The statement explained that they'd written to the Catholic House of Bishops to complain that the funeral was to be purely a Roman Catholic one, despite the fact that not all the victims were Catholics. They decided to take their complaint to the European Union via the World and European Evangelical Alliances, until several high-ranking officials attended the Evangelical funeral, held separately, for Rubén Santana. They felt very strongly, the alliance, that prior to this, that the authorities tend to discriminate against Spanish Protestants by their non-appearance at key events like that, and their general disregard for Spanish citizens who follow the evangelical faith. And they were particularly angry that in a pluralist, secularized society, the Catholic Church continues to monopolize state occasions or state ceremonies. They added that their aim is not to get the authorities to attend Protestant events, but they want a genuinely pluralist society where all citizens are treated equally, and this, they believe, would be achieved by holding a civil or multi-faith funeral, which would respect the beliefs of all victims, as well as the religious neutrality of the state. If the funeral, though, is going to be Catholic, that should be announced clearly beforehand, and it should also be stated that it is only for Catholic victims. More poignantly, Rubén Santana's widow wrote to the Catholic House of Bishops herself, expressly telling them that neither she nor her family wanted, nor would Rubén himself have wanted, to be included in a Catholic funeral, which runs totally contrary to evangelical Christian belief, as we've said. The service held separately in Madrid at a Baptist church was only for him, and never attempted to be a funeral for anyone else. Well, at the time of going to press, the Catholic House of Bishops had not replied to the Alliance's letter. But let's go back to the point of the controversy over the participation in the funeral. What is all the fuss about, and whose funeral was it anyway? Well, the funeral was for the victims of the Spanish air crash, all of whom, as far as I can tell, with the exception of Rubén Santana, who we mentioned, would have been at least nominally Roman Catholics. And as far as I'm aware, there have been no other complaints from any other groups about the non-participation or the non-representation of other religious beliefs at the funeral. As for the participation of Carlos Lozano, Anglican Bishop of Madrid, well, he claimed to speak, of course, on behalf of all churches and groups which belong to the Federation. Well, there wouldn't have been time to canvass opinion across the nation before the funeral was held, and there would have been a wide range of views anyway. But they said that the Federation, that they'd received a phone call from the Archbishop's office in Madrid saying it would like someone to participate in the funeral on behalf of Protestants on the grounds that there was a Protestant among those who died. And that's how Lopez came to be given 2 minutes to speak at the funeral. Well, the Federation justified or defended their action by saying that they considered it was time to get alongside the victims' families and not the time to hold a debate as to how such occasions should be organised. The Evangelical Alliance, on the other hand, said it regretted the fact that the Federation, having joined the Alliance in earlier calls for changes to this kind of occasion, i.e. that official state events should not just be Catholic, had now watered down their complaint by joining in the funeral. And their spokesman, Pedro Turquis, said he felt the government had failed in its duty to non-Catholic citizens. And in a private article, he added that attendance at a Catholic funeral goes right against the values and beliefs of evangelical Christianity. He also believes that, quote, participating with them in such a public service gives society the impression that one does not disagree with what is being said there, or at the very least, that one consents actively to what is going on. Turquis also believes that evangelicals will pay a political price for their participation at the funeral. The presence of the Federation at a Catholic funeral helps the government out of a hole, he says, as for the first time they were up against the ropes with regard to the Catholic domination of state ceremonies. The Alliance's statement complaining about this had been widely reported in the media, creating further debate about state-church relations. Manuel Suarez, an evangelical politician, says there are times when as Protestants we are afraid and have an inferiority complex, and we think that it is better to keep in with the government of the day, echoing the sentiments of the French Protestant King Henry IV, who is reputed to have said, "Paris is well worth a mass," a phrase which was used to justify his conversion to Catholicism. Well, Turquis' article is pertinently entitled, "Is Madrid well worth a mass?" Suarez goes on to say that the issue has thrown up two different ways of dealing with the government by evangelicals. The Alliance has opted for pushing the state to separate itself completely from the Catholic Church, claiming that a state funeral in a religiously neutral country should not represent any one religious grouping. However, it feels undermined in its approach by that of the Federation, which opted to accept the invitation to participate in the funeral. And Suarez argues that such a double-handed approach will not help a minority group like evangelicals gain influence. Well, when journalists picking up on the Alliance's complaint pressed the Deputy Prime Minister on a perceived lack of respect towards non-Catholics, she simply avoided all controversy by saying that a Protestant bishop was taking part in the funeral. So why was said bishop there? Well, Suarez says he doesn't doubt that Lopez took part from the best of intentions, and that while some people may say he just wanted to be in the photo, it's just as likely that he wanted to get an evangelical representation in that photo. In other words, in one sense, all evangelicals are included. But, says Suarez, the most important thing is not whether we have a higher or lower profile in society, but that we are consistent with our identity. It might have been more beneficial politically to say Madrid is well worth the Mass to ourselves as Protestants, but we should never stop saying that our consciences are dictated by God's word, and that we're not prepared to be silent on that for any political or public relations benefit. Well, the Alliance's complaint didn't just cause journalists to ask the Deputy Prime Minister questions, but has also been picked up by the spokesman for the Catalan Green Party, Joan Herrera. He plans to ask the Prime Minister why he didn't organise a civil state funeral, and said personally that he regretted that the religious pluralism of Spain has not been taken into account, nor has that of the accident's victims, nor has the religious neutrality of the state been considered. Well, after such a wide variety of views and facing this issue, what can we say? Well, the funeral was held in a Roman Catholic way for Roman Catholics, with an add-on for the one Protestant victim. The Protestant Federation, the Federe, accepted the invitation for that little participation on behalf of the one evangelical who died in the accident. Rightly or wrongly, well, I'll leave you to judge. The issue of religious neutrality rather begs the question of what kind of funeral there would be held. Is a state funeral necessary at all? Perhaps just a quiet ceremony with a flag at half-mast, and a few moments' silence would be more appropriate, thus leaving each of the victims' families, whether together or separately, to organise the funerals that they considered most appropriate for their loved ones. As for the question of a civil funeral, I'm not quite sure what that would be like. Would that be humanist? Because then that wouldn't respect the beliefs of others. And as for a multi-faith funeral, well, we here in England know all about the disasters that come from that kind of event, which end up being worse than useless. There's no easy solution, I think. Thank you for listening to Letter from England Broadcasting for AC Press. Goodbye for now.
Emisión.net